speak our truths, slay sacred cows, and sometimes agree to disagree. I'm Colin Truan. Joining me today, look out, East Coasters. He's here to tell you that your mountains are tiny and worthless. It's Justin Hausman.
I'm sure there's plenty of minerals in them. They're worth something. Probably.
Granite, the granite
well,
state, baby.
I don't know. I mean, I would assume they were all like just strip mined a long time ago.
I'm, of course, referring
corporations
to
that own all of it.
Justin's recent appearance on the Adventure Journal podcast, where the man who's never lived in the Northeast told his co-host, how worthless the East Coast is. So
that is not true. That is not at all true.
Steve should have come back at you harder. I felt like I'm a little more angry at Steve than you. I think he should have defended the great Northeast a little harder. Anyway, today on the show, we're going to get into what's been happening in the outdoor industry and community. But first, it's Friday when we're recording this. It's Friday the 13th, and we need to prepare for the weekend with long weekend coffee. But Justin, what are your outdoor plans for the weekend? Do you have any outdoor plans for the weekend, or are you going to be housebound and doing family stuff?
Oh, I don't think I have any plans. No, I don't.
You're a multimedia star now. You're a star of 2 different podcasts. You're a published author. It's crazy. You're making movies, so you don't have time to go outside anymore.
I really don't. I'll probably go for it's been a while since I've gone for a nice long bike ride.
There you go.
I've been surfing a lot, but I probably won't this weekend. I don't know.
Well, don't forget that with 4 varieties of beans, Long Weekend is the perfect coffee for all your adventures, not just on the weekend. Head to longweekend.coffee right now. Shop around. Enter the promo code ROCK10 at checkout. Get 10% off your first order. Long Weekend coffee. More weekend, please. But for our first story today, I put this one first, and I don't know, maybe we shouldn't start negative, but it's kind of funny. It's not negative, this is funny. Footwear Philistine and nemesis to both the rock fight and common sense, Crocs has unveiled the Crocs Classic Cowboy boot as part of Croctober. Now, the reason I wanted to include this, because this boot, I'm reading right from the press release, this boot is one of the company's most widely requested Crocs shoes, trending across social media. Recognizing this passion, Crocs created a cowboy boot that will launch on, this is a real thing, Croc Day, a fan-created holiday recognized annually on October 23rd. The Crocs Classic Cowboy boot features a high-shine Croc embossed texture and Western-inspired stitching.
Sorry, I'm looking at it right now.
I think it honestly looks a little bit better than a regular pair of Crocs, frankly. It does, right? But it does make me a little, sick to my stomach, too. What do you think of the Croc cowboy boot?
I think it's awesome that... Well, one is $120. I mean, you can get like an actual pair of cowboy boots for $120.
Like real cowboy boots.
But I guess... I can imagine wearing these as for a Halloween outfit or something, but when would I wear these?
It does seem to attract, because I understand. I make fun of Crocs a lot. I talk about it a lot. I get that. I'm in the minority.
I love Crocs.
Right? Exactly.
You're
I'm in the middle. I admit
a
I'm in the
hater
minority
for no reason.
Right.
But I can't imagine a scenario where I'm like, I'm gonna go with these. They have spurs.
It says the boot is embellished with metallic gibbets charm, which I need to talk about gibbets.
Gibbets. Oh, is that what they call those things?
Yeah. And the first spinnable spur charm attached to the back strap of the boot. So
why are these $120? But they make lined ones that actually have a collar, and they're like $50.
I imagine. Weird. Well, anytime you're making new shoes, right? There's molding. There's all the things. It's probably, I can't. If this is a one-off, it probably is just going to have to reflect the cost of the manufacturing to some degree, and there's probably a lot more material there. Plus, the setup, all that stuff. But
this is the first time I've ever been to the Crocs website.
Yeah, what do you think?
So much stuff. My God.
Yeah, well, when all you're doing is foam injection molding, you can probably do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I should get some. No, I have plenty. What am I doing? Stop it. Get out of here, Justin. I'm closing the tab. Okay. I have cowboy boots and I do wear them occasionally. But I think they probably cost like $120 when I ride a horse. Which I used to do a lot. That's why I own them. I used to ride all the time. There's actually such good riding up in Marin County, like really, really good riding. It's a blast. And I used to go to Montana and ride all the time. So I have cowboy boots for that. They're fun to wear around. I have boot jeans. I'll wear them around sometimes. The weird thing about cowboy boots is if you're not part of the world where you feel the urge to signify something. Like they seem like the most obvious scream of like, I don't feel like a real man, but these boots will help me or whatever. Like, and like my grandpa, who was a pastor, still is, I guess. I don't talk to him anymore, but wore cowboy boots all the time. It's like, dude, we live in coastal California. I doubt you've ever ridden a horse. You drive a Porsche. Like, why are you wearing cowboy boots around? Like, it didn't even occur to me that was weird because he always did. And so when I see like DeSantis in his dress suits and his cowboy boots, I'm like, well, that seems. Part of me is like, that's normal,
right?
But it's just like, doesn't that? I can't imagine trying so hard, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's what. Well, the cowboy fashion is an interesting thing, right? Because I mean, I noticed that especially when I started going to Colorado, and you get to like be at the airport, and there's dudes just walking around with cowboy hats on, like pearl snap shirts and cowboy boots. And it's like, maybe they're real cowboys. I assume you're a real cowboy that works on a ranch, like up in, like Wyoming or something, or in Colorado. Why we're not to the airport? Like, it just sort of like, so there's the human nature thing of like, I need you to understand what tribe I'm a part of.
I mean, we all do that. Like, I mean, I mean, I'm sure if you see me, you're like, oh, that guy probably surfs and likes to go outside. Like, I'm sure it's, but
I
it's
think
weird.
You're getting a more dad vibe these days,
Probably. I mean, I used to live and work on a cattle ranch. I'm sure we've talked about it. And like, we didn't wear cowboy hats. The owner didn't own, I mean, I think the owner of owned a cowboy hat for when they would when we did like branding and when he would sell cows and like cowboys from like the Central Valley would come over and like buy. So then he'd have to like look the part. But like the rest of the time we're both in like jeans and like hoodies and just like hiking boots.
So is that you think for most people it's like a holdover from like when they were kids? Sure. Like I want to be a cowboy.
There's no, I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, I literally worked on a cattle ranch and at no point did it occur to me I needed like a snapped button down and a big buckle and cowboy. Like it didn't, none of that would have been helpful.
But you weren't riding horses then. Remember you told me about it. You were riding around four-wheelers and stuff
but
like that.
But none of that stuff helps when you're riding a horse either. I mean, I guess certain kind of jeans are helpful when you're on a horse.
Or the heel from the boot, right? And
for sure. Yeah. Like you definitely want that if you're riding a horse. But yeah, it's funny. Whatever. Who cares? I think it looks. Dude, honestly, if I could get away with it, I would dress like that all the time. I think it looks absolutely rad. I would just feel like a poser walking around with a Stetson on.
Well, our next headline is about some positive outdoor industry sustainability news. We're as critical as we can be on the show about sustainability initiatives out of the outdoor industry. I'd like to, give credit where it's due. And SmartWool, I've always been a big SmartWool fan, and thredUP, which is a big secondhand reseller organization. They're partnered up now on what they're calling Second Cut Resale. It's a program that allows customers to shop secondhand products through smartwool.thredup.com and resell gently worn items on thredup.com for SmartWool shopping credit. Again, credit where credit is due. I love that SmartWool is working with thredUP. thredUP is becoming kind of like a go-to destination for secondhand goods. And they're not just doing, that was my one criticism of like even Houdini's efforts. It's like, well, if you go to the Houdini, in their store in Stockholm, if you're on their website, it's just Houdini stuff. If you go to Warnwear, it's just Patagonia stuff. You have to go to a Gear Trade or REI or whatever if you want to actually have a more rounded shopping experience. So I like to see SmartWool like, hey, let's just reach out to someone who's doing secondhand already and partner with them. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I mean, I would say half of the mail we get is from thredUP or to thredUP. Like I think my wife is probably the single biggest supporter of thredUP.
All right.
But I agree. Like I think we're coming to a point where there will be just kind of bigger kind of clearing houses, if that's the right term. I don't know if that is the right term, or just online shopping spaces for you, stuff like this. I mean, we go, especially with kids, like we're going through so much kids clothes all the time and we just pass it down to our friends or whatever, but there's a donation bin down the street. It's like, I don't know where that stuff goes. A lot of it's pretty high quality. Like I could sell it. Like, I just don't feel like dealing with it, So the more this becomes normal, the better. And yeah, like we've had some of those bags that SmartWool sends you for a while where you can send your socks back. And
I got one kicking around. I haven't used it yet.
We just never do, And so I hope that this, I'd like to start using more of this sort of thing. I mean, I really do think it's just a change in perception, or not perception maybe, but just like just kind of reorient sort of your relationship with clothes, where it's more like, this is like a temporary thing for me. And then it'll move along to something else rather than this like thing I'm going to own forever, which is awesome if it's, cause that's also very important too. Mm-hmm. But I don't, it frees you up to make more clothing changes or more clothing decisions and stuff like that. Like, this shirt was fine, and like I'm not going to feel guilty if I don't want to wear it anymore because I can just send it along to thredUP or Patagonia or John's or Gear Trade, and just like there it goes. So I think that would be great.
I've had the stance pretty much where it's like we can't rely on the consumer to solve a lot of these sustainability issues because it's just too complicated, and that's been mostly in response to like working for brands, and it's like putting greenwashing on hang tags and things like that, and it's like consumers just want to be able to pick up what they want to buy and buy it. I'm definitely willing to be proven wrong if this is kind of where the momentum comes from. Because, and I think it's going to come from the younger generation. But even our generation now, like hearing like what you're saying, like your wife getting constantly pegged with, the thredUP stuff. And my brother, I remember him shopping 10 plus years ago for his kid for like used clothes on like eBay and kind of making fun of him. Like, just go to Old Navy, and everything like that. And I'm like, oh shit, he was kind of on it. Like he knew he was doing the right thing. And the more, and then also what, Gear Trade has told us about their average age of their shoppers about 27. So the secondhand thing, the perception of it being lesser than is definitely going away. And people are now understanding it. I think the idea of thinking of someone like SmartWool, which is, underwear and socks, and like, oh, do you want to get gently used SmartWool stuff? Like not that long ago would have been almost off-putting. And now you think like, oh, actually that makes a lot of sense. Cause I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that gets worn barely. Where that person got that one pair of socks, so they went on like an Outward Bound course, or they went, or they tried hiking that one time, or they just tried them and didn't like them. It's like, I'm sure there's tons of those kinds of examples. And so, I think the big thing in that is just the brands realizing like, the retail aspect of it. How do you make that part of it easier on consumers? That's what needs to continue to improve. And that's definitely what I liked about this story. I mean, and you mentioned the bags too from SmartWool, their second cut project where you send them your old socks. That's great. That's been very successful for them too. And they're figuring out ways to recycle them and reuse them and create new things from them. So more of this, please.
Yeah, lots more for everything.
That's a good segue into our next story, which is also about the evolution of society, because we have another rebrand out of the outdoor industry. Earlier this week, on the you're already laughing.
I don't know why this is funny to me.
On the Rock Fight, I put up an episode talking with brand critic Booth McIver about rebrands for Mountain Hardwear and Innovate, and now we have news that Eddie Bauer is changing its logo from cursive to a blocky standard print font with a goose, the goose is an homage to Eddie Bauer's heritage as they were the first to patent a goose down jacket in 1936. But they're moving away from the classic cursive logo. And in doing so, CEO Tim Bantle was quoted in an article in Fast Company saying, "A big part of what I'm going to need to do here is reintroduce this great heritage brand to the next generation. And kids don't even learn to read cursive in school anymore." I'll let you take it from here.
Doesn't cursive feel like something that's going to come back?
Fuck yes. My kids taught themselves cursive because they thought it was cool.
So the new logo looks cool. I like it a lot.
I think it's okay. I think it's a little too blocky. Feels a little too like it was made in Canva,
now that I'm looking at the current. Well, I don't know. Have they already made the change? Perhaps the former Eddie Bauer, the cursive logo. And you know what? If I didn't know how to read cursive, this is pretty loopy. It's pretty difficult. Like there's no way you could read this if you don't read cursive. So I get it. Like this is like old school cursive with a weird E, and the B is like the proper way to do it. I can see. I see why. I mean, the cursive logo was cool, but
I think it's a weird one where I don't think the new one is that great. And I do think that goose looks like something straight out of Canva, like a Canva L. If you ever played around in Canva or some sort of like creative generator thing, it looks like that. However, I don't think the Eddie Bauer cursive one ever looked good. I remember the first time really thinking about that I don't like it was probably when it was like on the side of a Ford Explorer or something back in the 90s.
Okay,
and it looked terrible.
That's the problem with it now is that I think, I've talked about this in some of my coverage. Like Eddie Bauer makes such good stuff.
Right.
But I think that they've lost, and this is probably part of it, that I think they've lost the. I don't think a lot of people who are only sort of casually involved in the outdoors probably think about Eddie Bauer as an actual outdoor brand.
They don't.
They probably think of them as a clothing brand. So I can see why, and I think a lot of that probably has to do with like they were on this freaking Eddie Bauer Explorer edition, and like. Yeah. I think they may have like made like furniture or like blankets and like they kind of tried to go into home goods. I think, and so I can see why they would want to make this change. It looks like a hunting logo to me with the flying goose.
I think the cursive looks more hunting too, frankly. It's like, Eddie Bauer, who do you want to be? And I think obviously this is what Tim Bantle, who is probably trying to figure out right now. Because I grew up with them being a outlet mall brand, right? That's what I thought of Eddie Bauer. And then First Ascent was like this, we're going to have top of the pyramid goods. And you've said on this podcast how good you like the First Ascent, how great the First Ascent stuff is. So good. I've used some of it. It's amazing. But then that is now, we know that's gone. We did an episode earlier this year about them firing their climbing team, right? So it's, now I kind of look at them like, well, are you just back to being an outlet mall brand? It's like, I think if I were in charge right now, knowing what I know, which is not a lot, I'd be like, well, are you going to be an Ella Bean or a Land's End competitor? Because that's kind of what you feel like you are. And I don't know if this logo goes, it probably goes more in that direction.
Yeah, maybe. I think it makes sense. I think it makes sense. I think he's totally right that like young kids don't read cursive. I don't know that they care. Like you just tell them what the logo was. Oh, that's what that is. Okay, but the thing that is nice about the old one is it's very, you recognize, even if you don't read cursive, like you recognize that right away. Like it's been around for a long time. Like I can barely see that on like a sign somewhere, and I know that's an Eddie Bauer store. I agree. The block print one,
it's kind of bland.
It's bland. I do think there's whatever the typeface is. I like it. I think it's cool, but I actually think I'm looking at the patch. If there was like a patch, this Eddie Bauer patch with the goose on a jacket, I think it would look pretty dope.
That'd be more like that. Now, are you Canada Goose? Like, I mean, I don't know.
I don't love the goose, but like the way the words look, I'm into it. I think I like it. I think I like it.
If he's serious about like, if there was like well, hey, and kids don't read cursive anymore anyway. Like, okay, cool. But if you're like, hey, listen, kids don't read cursive, so we need to do something different. Because I think the opening thing you said is I think cursive is going to make a comeback. It will not go away. My oldest daughter was not taught cursive in school. She knows how to write in cursive because she just like, she's a little nerdy kid who sat there and like found pictures of it probably on the internet and started writing it, and figuring it out. So I do, like we've seen this before where stuff comes and goes and pop culture influences things. Somebody's going to write a book in cursive and it's going to be like the next thing with like the next generation alpha or whatever.
Oh, I'm sure.
So I hope that wasn't the really driving force here. At the same time, I'm all for a refresh, but I think it has to be then, I want to know what the brand's really going to be. And I read through the article. I didn't really see anything that made me feel like, oh, this is the change they're actually going to make for the brand. So we'll see. All right. Well, our next story is from the outdoor athlete world. As endurance athlete, Killian Jornet recently completed a journey through the Pyrenees, revisiting the peaks he climbed as a kid. That's important, apparently, and what he describes as one of the toughest adventures of his life, which that's saying something. This guy's done some hard things. In total, he hiked over 300 miles, accumulated an elevation gain of more than 131,000 feet, and engaged in more than 155 hours of physical activity after linking this is over 8 days, I think is what it was. Yeah. 177 peaks and more than 3,000 meters in just 8 days. Jornet described this journey as an incredible experience. Rediscovering the peaks that I had forgotten was a spectacular experience. And on the other hand, one of the hardest things I've ever done. This was in a press release, like on Outdoor Sports Wire. It's one of those, didn't quite know what to make of it, like how to feel about it. I see things like, it was an incredible experience. Like, well, what did you experience? I don't know. We've talked about this before too, on the athletic thing versus just the experience thing. I don't know. Did you have any hard thoughts coming out of this one?
I saw the release and I gave up. Because I don't know. Is that a lot? Like I don't know anymore. The numbers are so beyond anything. Before we started recording, by the way, world, we were Colin was trying to puss out on a bikepacking part of our bikepacking trip because there was 5,000 feet of elevation in one day. And
not true.
And it's like, all right, that's a lot, right? Like that's a lot. Like, and so I don't know. Lord knows what he did. So like I can't. It's like Holland free soloing El Cap. It's like so far beyond anything anyone that I've ever known personally will ever do. It's almost meaningless at this point to me. Like someone's going to run from the base to the top of Everest in one day pretty soon. And like, okay. Honestly, it's like the steroid. I'm not saying these people are on steroids, but it's almost like the steroid era in baseball where it's just like, sure, people who have never hit home runs before are hitting 80 home runs in a season. Why not? Like not everything's out the window and these are super people now. So we just kind of stand back and watch. That's kind of how I feel about it.
This just to me is like, it's antiquated. There was a film, I suggested it to you and you didn't get a chance to watch it, but I finished it yesterday called Race to the Summit, which is on Netflix. And it was about this rivalry between Uli Steck and Donnie and Danny Arnold. And my takeaway from that was, I mean, it's back and forth, and they're like, oh, we set the fastest time on the Eiger, and then, whatever. And then there's controversy around, did Uli Stick actually do it on Annapurna and everything. And it just feels so 30 years ago, 20 years ago, like when this stuff was really, when the outdoor kind of space was kind of blossoming, and like this is, we tried to how do we make this a sport? And that was kind of what drove interest in it, and the eco challenge was going on. And
that's interesting.
Right? I just feel like, I told somebody recently, I'm like, look, outdoors is just another form of entertainment. It's entertainment without a screen. It's right, but it's also like, it's something that we all choose to go do to entertain ourselves and to have fun. And you can find moments of inspiration and gain a lot out of it. But just the days of the big Sufferfest and that being cool, or finding inspiration through the Sufferfest, like, do they even exist anymore? So when I think of I'm not taking anything away from Killian Jornet. He's clearly an incredible athlete. He's won really notable ultramarathons, and he's been relevant in that scene for a long time. But to get a whole press release, talk about how he went for a big 8-day just crushing adventures.
Those aren't things that mean anything to anybody else. That's not. Right. I mean, at least like a famous traverse. It's like, well, okay, I've heard of that. I know that people are trying to do that, and most of them can't, and you succeeded. But if you're just picking a random series of peaks, 177 of them, which to me is that just are you running on a giant saw? How are there that
Probably.
many peaks that you can get to in 8 days? But what's interesting is I've had I never really thought about it this way, but so I've been engaged in a lot of arguments in the last few weeks about baseball with.
Well, it's because you're a Dodgers fan and your team shit the bed, but that's fine.
They always that's part of the charm. It's way more fun to hate your team than to love your team. I feel bad for people who can't actively hate their favorite teams.
Talk to Red Sox fans in 2005. We're like, what do we do now?
It's way more fun to hate your team. But people don't seem to understand that. I'd much rather have a team that just has something notable for them. Everyone's talking about the Dodgers. Nobody's talking about the Blue Jays. Nobody gives a shit.
Right.
There's a single person in this country that's talked about the Guardians in the last 2 weeks. But everybody's talking about the Dodgers. It's fun.
Well, the baseball playoffs are broken. But anyway.
So Ronald Acuna Jr., hit 40 home runs and stole 73 bases. And I've been arguing with people all over the internet about how, the Major League Baseball made it easier to steal bases on purpose. And now everyone's talking about Acuna's 40 home runs, 70 stolen base season as if it's this huge achievement. It's dude, they literally made it easier to steal bases so that people would steal more bases, and nobody's talking about that. You get all these giant stories on ESPN. Look at him. Oh my God, he stole 70. It's are you really not going to at least say, and of course, during a season where they made it easier to steal bases. But anyway, go back to the celebration. No, they don't. So anyway, I've been arguing crazy about that, which is funny because I play catch with a neighbor kid maybe once a week. I haven't played actual baseball in at least 20 years. But I go hiking and running and all this stuff every single day. But I'm not remotely interested in arguing the merits of Killian Jornet's achievements, or even the thing about did Reinhold Messner actually get to the top of Annapurna? That's a philosophical point, which is kind of interesting, but in terms of who holds the world record, I don't care, and which is interesting. I will argue about things I don't sports stuff that I'm never going to play. I don't play football. I'm never going to play football, but I'll argue to the death about the value of a running back over a tight end or whatever. But something like this, it just, if for whatever reason, for me, it just doesn't really translate. And that press release reads as that. I mean, it's Killian Jornet's job to wow you. That's the only reason.
That's true. Yeah, that's
paid
a good point.
To do anything.
Yeah, so, he's a publicist who's dealing with this, right? I mean, that's what happens.
So that's why he gets paid. So they're gonna that reads like a press release like anything else. Hey, we came out with new Super Tread shoes or whatever. So.
Well, this is probably a pretty decidedly American point of view, too, because that was an interesting thing. I thought of our Messner conversation from last week's pod, watching this Race to the Summit movie, because after Uli Steck did the first ascent up the south face of Annapurna, there's this whole, basically, the Oscars of mountaineering thing that happens in Switzerland and in Europe. And it's clearly a different thing over there. The mountain climbing scene in Switzerland specifically, and I know in Britain and other places, there is a long history there. There is media that covers that almost exclusively. There was controversy after the fact about Uli Steck's Annapurna run climb, that there was this journalist, and well, that guy doesn't climb mountains. He just covers mountains. And it reminded me of our Messner conversation, because we were kind of shitting on the German guy who's kind of like, what are you doing calling him out? It's well, this is... it seems like there is a kind of like you're just discovering the baseball. You're just talking about the baseball and football conversations here. Clearly, there are circles where this is that, right? Where right, and so Killian Jornet putting out a press release. I'm sure there are people like, whoa, oh my god, that's pretty through the Pyrenees. All right, right.
I'm sure.
Right.
I'm sure.
The thing that I feel like should be universally discussed is the risk versus reward conversation, because. I don't know, like when Alex Lowe died on Shishapangma in the 90s and he had little kids at home and stuff like that. I mean, we said it was tragic. I think if I heard that now, I'd be like, that's just irresponsible. You know what I mean? Like, well, I get it. You're making your money that way. And I can only look at it through my own lens. But it's like, I don't know why parents who do badass things get a pass from the criticism. You know, it's like, I'd have to change my lifestyle, I guess, if I was making money from climbing, because I have to be here at least until they're 18, I guess. I don't know. It's just, that's something that made me think of it too.
Well, that's for sure true. I mean, I've thought about that. Like, I don't even know how you could be a professional athlete and have kids, even if you're a baseball player or something. I mean, other than I guess you're like, here's at least they're making actual money. So you can be
making millions of dollars.
Sorry, you're only going to see me for 3 months a year, but like, your life is pretty sick. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't. The risk versus reward thing is hard for me because I'm not a type A like physical super achiever. So I understand that if you are that way, that's all that matters to you, and that you probably can't sit still. That you have to be out like pushing yourself and breaking records and like that's just not me at all.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to even have like. I feel guilty going camping without my kids, let alone. Yeah, climbing something that I might fall off and die, you know? So like, I that's just not for me to judge because it's just so far removed from anything I'm interested in doing. But I like the thing that I think about a lot when it comes to like FKTs or whatever is the sort of like surfing is always, think has long wrestled with, do we give a remote shit about professional surfing?
Sure.
And it's been really, I think the answer is kind of, you know, and like if the waves are really good that year and the surfers are interesting that year and the formats make sense that year, it can be really memorable and you can get really into it. Like I have sat around and watched contests with friends on TV and been like, wow, you know, like we were like cheering like that's happened once, you know. For the most part, it's just really hard to think of surfing as something where you can compete and be like better at it than somebody else in that way. I mean, obviously some people are better, but you know what I mean, you know? And I kind of think of it like that with these like outdoor like achievements too. Like that's cool if that's what you're into, but like it doesn't really speak to my experience at all. Like if I'm interested in how fast I'm moving outside, it's because I need to get to somewhere before it gets dark.
Yeah.
Or like this loop is 3 days, and if I don't hike 12 miles a day, I won't finish it. Like that's it. It's never like, oh, sick, I hiked there faster than that. I just can't fathom thinking that way.
But are some of these folks like, are they absolved from the criticism? Like, and I almost hesitate to bring the name up because I feel like if the wrong person hears this, I'm just going to get a scathing email about like Hillary Nelson dying last year. And it's, you know.
But that's what they do. You know, I mean, like, I think
but
if
she's on a Himalayan peak on skis with little kids at home. Like,
I know.
That's, you know, when Uli Seck's climbing Annapurna, they're saying 1 out of every 3 climbers that attempts Annapurna dies. Like, those are real. That's not like. You mentioned Mount Washington in the AJ pod. It's like, yeah, it's the deadliest mountain, but that's because it's so accessible that people die from exposure because they're not prepared or they have a heart attack or whatever. This isn't that, you know. You should know. And
I know. Yeah,
I don't want to get in trouble like criticizing
feel.
Hillary Nelson, which I feel like I'm probably going to now. But it's just like, are we not allowed to at least raise those points?
Well, I that's interesting. I don't know. You are in the surf world. I mean, like I've interviewed tons of big wave surfers. That's the first thing I always ask them. You know, like, are you thinking about your family? And usually they say, I'm going to stop now once they have kids. I think, you know, the nature of big wave surfing, usually you get into it earlier in life. And so like a lot of these guys started in their 20s and then they have families. They never stop though. Like they never stop, but they'll say that they'll say like, oh, you know, every big wave surfer I've interviewed always has a story about, you know, some horrific wipeout, usually at Mavericks, because that seems to be the most dangerous one. And they're like pinned to the bottom and they think they're going to die. And they all have the same thought. This might be unique to surfing too, where there's a lot of like near death it's not like, well, no, I guess you can get trapped on a mountain and think you're going to die, then you get off anyway. But there's a lot of moments in big wave surfing, apparently, where you really think this is it. Like you're underwater, you've given up, you don't think you're going to come back up. And every time I've ever talked to any of these guys about it, they always think, what the fuck am I doing here? And, you know, like I interviewed Shane Dorian a few years ago, and he's probably the best big wave surfer in the world, and he has a couple of kids, and he had a bad fall at Mavericks, and that, you know, he was the most like raw about it, where he was, you know, underwater and really was like, I can't believe I've done this to my family. And then he comes back up, and he's like, okay. And then, you know, there's a swell at Jaws, and he's like, fuck, here I am buying a ticket to Jaws. Like, so I'm sure it's like that. I mean, that's what I say. That's what I mean when I'm talking about how, like, I'm just so far removed from being interested in doing those things. Like, their minds are different than mine. I mean,
no,
like,
that's a good point. And then maybe that's where it's not fair. Maybe that's, you know, I consider that.
There's a reason that Killian Jornet has run things that you haven't, right? Like, he has a different.
Totally.
It's not just because he's like, I mean, certainly, I have no doubt genetically he's got some sort of advantages, but I mean, he's also got the mindset where, like, that's what matters to him, not
that's
anything,
what matters,
not other things.
I do wonder, though, because if you put a gun to my head and say, I'm taking you out to Mavericks today, and even though you've never surfed anything bigger than like 4 feet in your life, you got a paddle in, or you can go climb a Himalayan peak, I would take the wave.
I'd choose Mavericks. Yeah.
And I don't know, I imagine it's a little like our grizzly versus the shark conversation last week. I wonder what the metrics and the participation numbers say about which one is actually more risky. But I've never heard anybody say, well, if you surf these big waves, even Nazare, right? You know, it's just sort of like, you made the point, I think no one's ever died there. And it's like, I don't think anyone's ever died at Nazare.
Mm-mm.
And
not surfing
people
big
die
waves
on these mountains every single year. So I used to.
What's weird though, physically, you have a much better chance of climbing some of these crazy peaks. Like, I've like had like a very brief, like, hey, how's it going, man, with Alex Honnold. That's about it, you know. Even then, you could see he's different. Like, the one time I was up close with Alex Honnold, Jimmy Chin had this a little bit too, and he's been in some pretty sketchy plases. Like, they have the same like 1,000-yard stare as a big wave surfer does, which is the same 1,000-yard stare that like a super badass jiu-jitsu fighter has. Like, I've been around a lot of these people, and they all have the same, like, probably something like a soldier has, like this, like they've been in places that have made them like touch parts of their like soul that I never have. Like, I'm just like a puppy. Hey, blah, this is fun, blah, whatever. You know, these people have like seen some shit, right? And that's right. They all kind of have that. And
I guess maybe that answers my question, right? Because if you have that, that's probably something that's impossible to turn off, regardless if you have kids.
I think that's right.
Just, you cannot turn it off. You do not have this rational side of our brain that you and I are talking about, where it's just like, well, I could not go do that, but how is that even an option right now? Like, that's not an option. I'm going to go do that. That's interesting. All right. Well, no, I think that's, I don't want, honestly, for maybe the criticism I'm talking about, or just kind of have a deeper conversation about it, I don't want these people to stop. I mean, I think it is interesting. It gives us something to talk about. It's something to shoot for. Anytime somebody pushes something, I don't know, it's interesting. But maybe this is just a sign of my, advancing age, of like the risk versus reward thing just does not seem remotely worth it for most things anymore.
I agree. I mean, I deleted a comment the other day on an Instagram video of a famous mountain biker. I guess it was at Rampage, hucking himself off what would have been the biggest jump or drop that we know of.
Mm-hmm.
It was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And like, he eats shit and he's in the hospital. And I put that comment, like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And then I deleted it. Cause like,
right. What good is that doing? Right?
What good is that doing?
Yeah, right,
but that's that's how I think of it, But like, that's not how they think of it. I'm sure I have no doubt that like a lot of these people, if they looked at my life, will put a gun in their mouth. It's like, why are you wasting your life?
You like to ride a fully rigid single speed?
Yeah, you're just walking around your cute little town and like surfing and like reading books. Like, fuck, kill me now. Like, I'm sure that's how they think.
You've done the same gravel loop 6 days in a row? Like, yeah, it's fucking great.
Your credit score is what now?
My credit score rules. Should have seen what it was 10 years ago. It's awesome now.
Yeah, I mean, but that's I look for I want to be the guy in white New Balances like talking about mortgages. I don't want to be the person like trading war stories about having to breathe a dead body's supplemental oxygen on the top of Choi Oyu. That's not what I want in life.
All right, man. Well, we can wrap it up there. Please, if you're listening to this, give us a 5-star rating, follow or subscribe wherever you're listening. Send all of your feedback over to myrockfight@gmail.com. Justin, what do you got to plug? What's going on in AJ? We getting a newsletter this week? What's happening?
Just dropped a couple hours ago. Cool story about a Scottish guy who classic, like on a bar bet, was challenged to paddle the entire length of the Yukon River, and he never paddled a canoe in his life, and he was like wildly unfit.
I love those stories.
He was like in Ireland, was just like drunk off his ass. Some Canadian
so he's in Ireland, and he's got to go to
he's never
Canada.
Like, he's like I never spent any time in the wilderness, and he's just like, all right, fine. But he was like, it's like he'd like been through a divorce and was kind of like retired and just did it, and he had a blast.
Amazing.
So I talk about that guy and the epic e-bike that I truly love, that I've been riding around a bunch.
So if you're not subscribed to the Adventure Journal newsletter, you're not going to get that one, but subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Also, make sure you check out Adventure Journal's new podcast. Justin, you can hear Justin on that. It's how to get even more Houseman in your life, which everybody needs. Everyone could use a little more Houseman.
I don't think my wife would agree with you, but everybody but my wife.
The Rock Bite is a production of Rock Bite LLC. For Justin Houseman, I'm Colin Truth. Thanks for listening. Here to take us out, like always, like he always does, Krista Makes from Less Than Jake is here. He's right here. He's going to sing the Rock Fight song right now. We'll see you next time.